The scent of stale coffee and nervous tension hung heavy in the air of the corporate boardroom. It was a scent Marcus Thorne knew well, though it usually mingled with the metallic tang of sea salt and the acrid smoke of a controlled detonation. Here, the only explosions were of the ego variety. He sat at the far end of a gleaming mahogany table, a monolith of polished wood that seemed designed to intimidate. Across from him, a tribunal of three executives from Apex Global Solutions, a defense logistics contractor, stared back. They saw a man in a suit, a candidate for a high-level security consultation position. They did not see the weapon. Marcus was used to being invisible. That was the point, after all. For 20 years as a United States Navy SEAL, his job was to blend into shadows and to be the quiet problem no one saw coming until it was far too late. He'd conducted counterterrorism operations in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, executed shipboardings in the pitch-black waters of the Persian Gulf, and trained indigenous forces in the dense, humid jungles of the Philippines. His body was a roadmap of that service, a collection of scars and a stillness in his posture that spoke of a man who had faced death and found it unimpressive. The lead executive, a man named Harrington with a silk tie that probably cost more than Marcus's first car, was in the middle of a pompous monologue. And so you see, Mr. Thorne, while your resume is unconventional, we need a consultant who can interface with our clients, someone who understands the boardroom, not just the battlefield. We need a suit. Marcus listened, on his face a placid mask. He'd been in country for a month, decompressing from his final deployment. The transition was harder than he'd let on. The silence of his apartment was louder than any firefight. The civilian world felt chaotic in its own, inexplicable way. People worried about deadlines, not IEDs. He'd taken this interview as a step toward normalcy, a chance to translate his skills into a new language. The second executive, a woman with sharp glasses and a sharper gaze, scanned his paperwork. It says here you have extensive experience in maritime interdiction. Is that just corporate speak for being a sailor? Before Marcus could answer, the third executive, a younger man named Davies who seemed to be trying too hard to prove himself, leaned forward. He had the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of never being truly challenged. His eyes narrowed, taking in Marcus's physique, the way his suit jacket strained slightly across his shoulders, the upright, almost rigid way he sat. "You know, Mr. Thorne," Davies began, a smirk playing on his lips, "we value a certain culture here at Apex. We're a team. We don't stand on ceremony. I see you're still wearing your uniform." He gestured vaguely at Marcus's attire. It was a perfectly tailored, conservative navy blue suit. "It's a bit military, don't you think? It creates a barrier. It makes you look like you're still on a base, not in a collaborative workspace. Why don't you loosen up? In fact," he said, his voice dripping with condescending authority, "remove your uniform. Take off the jacket. Lose the tie. I'll be one of us." A profound silence descended on the room. It was the kind of silence that occurs just before a shockwave hits. Harrington shifted uncomfortably in his chair, sensing a line had been crossed but unsure how to articulate it. The woman with the glasses looked up from the papers, her expression a mixture of curiosity and unease. Marcus didn't move. For a long, stretched moment, he was utterly still. To the executives, it might have looked like compliance, or perhaps shock. They didn't understand stillness. They didn't know that in his world, extreme stillness was a precursor to extreme action. It was the calm before the storm, the held breath before the trigger pull. His mind wasn't processing an insult. It was cataloging the room. Exits, one main door behind him, one service door to the left. Windows, sealed. Non-operational. Potential threats. None. Just three clueless civilians. Potential allies. None. Outcome. He was in control. Then he did something that made the air in the room turn to ice. He smiled. It wasn't a warm, friendly smile. It was a cold, slow, deliberate curve of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of a predator who has just realized he is being toyed with by a field mouse. It was a smile that had been practiced in the mirror of a sniper's hide, a smile that said, "I know something you don't know." He slowly, almost theatrically, unbuttoned his suit jacket. The soft click of the button was deafening in the quiet. He didn't stand. He didn't break eye contact with Davies. With one hand, he smoothly shrugged the jacket from his left shoulder, then his right, and let it fall over the back of his chair. He reached up and, with the same deliberate calm, loosened his silk tie and unbuttoned the top button of his crisp white shirt. And then he leaned forward. "You just asked a Navy SEAL to undress," he said, his voice low, soft, and more terrifying than any shout could ever be. "So, let's be clear about what that means." He pulled the collar of his shirt aside, just enough to reveal the stark, black ink of a trident identifier tattoo on his chest, a symbol of the ultimate brotherhood. Then he held up his left hand, turning it over. A network of fine white scars ran across his knuckles and palm, a roadmap of countless hand-to-hand encounters. He pointed to a small, circular scar near his left eye. "This one's from shrapnel in Ramadi. The piece was too small to remove, so I just tell people it's a freckle." His gaze swept across the table, pinning each of them in turn. He gestured to a faint line that disappeared into his hairline. "This is from a knife fight in a safe house in Manila. The other guy didn't have a scar. He had a eulogy." He leaned back, the picture of relaxed menace. He pointed to a deep, puckered mark on his right forearm, visible just below his rolled-up sleeve. "And this is from a breaching charge that went hot a little too early. We were taking down a high-value target in Somalia. The door blew and so did part of the wall. I got this, but the target didn't get to his weapon." He looked directly at Davies, whose smirk had long since vanished, replaced by a pale, wide-eyed expression of horror. "This suit," Marcus said, his voice hardening just a fraction, "is not a uniform. And it's a disguise. It's what I wear when I'm trying to play by your rules in your world. You see this?" He picked up the navy blue jacket. "This cost $1,200. It was tailored to hide the fact that I can draw a concealed pistol from under my left arm in under 2 seconds. It was cut to allow my full range of motion to disarm a man twice my size." He let the jacket drop. "This isn't a uniform. A uniform is what I wore when I was pinned down by machine gun fire for 6 hours in a muddy ditch in Afghanistan, wondering if I'd ever see my daughter's face again. A uniform is what my teammates wore when they loaded their best friend's body onto a helicopter, his blood soaking into the fabric. A uniform is what gets you a hero's burial at Arlington, with a flag folded so tight the corners could cut you." He stood up, and for the first time, the executives felt his true physical presence. He wasn't a large man, not in the bodybuilder sense, but he was built of dense, coiled muscle and sinew. He radiated a controlled power that filled the room. He walked slowly to the window, his back to them. They could only see his reflection in the dark glass, a solitary figure against the city skyline. "You think a uniform is just a piece of cloth," he continued, his voice quieter now, forcing them to lean in to hear. "You think it's a symbol of something outdated, a barrier. You don't understand that it's a skin. It's a second layer of flesh that you can never truly remove. It's the weight of the rifle you carried for 1,000 miles. It's the sound of your own heartbeat in your ears as you wait for the order to move. Wani, it's the faces of the men who didn't make it home, burned into the back of your eyelids every night." He turned back to face them. The cold smile was gone, replaced by an expression of profound, weary patience. He was no longer the predator. He was the teacher, explaining a basic concept to a particularly slow student. "You asked me to be one of you," he said. "I've been trying for the last hour. I sat here and listened to you talk about quarterly profits and synergy and client interfacing. I watched Mr. Davies here check his watch 3 times while I was answering a question about my qualifications. I saw Ms. Reynolds edit a text message under the table. This," he gestured around the room, "is your battlefield. I get that, and I'm here to learn it. But don't you ever, for a single second, mistake my willingness to adapt for a weakness." He walked back to his chair and calmly picked up his jacket, slipping his arms back into it with practiced ease. He retied his tie, the movements economical and precise. He was redonning his disguise. He stopped by Davies' chair. The younger man flinched, pressing himself back. Marcus leaned down, his face close to the executive's ear. "You have a nice watch," he said softly. "But let me tell you something about time. When you're a SEAL, time is not a number on a dial. It's the time between an explosion and the ringing in your ears. It's the seconds it takes for a medic to get to a wounded man. It's the fraction of a moment you have to decide whether to shoot or hold your fire. That's the kind of time I live by. Your watch can't measure that. He straightened up and addressed the whole room. Now you have a choice. We can continue this interview, and you can ask me about my actual skills, risk assessment, logistics in hostile environments, personnel security, crisis management. Or I can walk out that door and you can explain to your board of directors why you drove away a candidate with 2 decades of unparalleled experience in the exact field your company operates in. All because you were more concerned with the way he tied his tie. The silence returned, thicker and more suffocating than before. Harrington cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. He looked at Davies with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Davies, could you get us some coffee?" he said, his voice firm. Davies, grateful for an escape route, practically fled the room. Harrington turned to Marcus. His entire demeanor shifted. The pompous front was gone, replaced by a look of genuine respect and a hint of awe. "Please, Mr. Thorne, have a seat," he said, his voice now humble. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Your perspective is exactly what we're lacking here. We talk about operational security and risk management in theory. You've lived it. Tell me about your experience with supply chain logistics in non-permissive environments. How do you protect assets when the local government is unreliable?" The rest of the interview was a different beast entirely. Marcus spoke their language, translating his combat experience into corporate strategy. He talked about the psychology of checkpoints and how it applied to vetting local partners. He described the intricacies of securing a perimeter and how it related to protecting a corporate campus. He explained how to read the pattern of life in a village to anticipate an ambush, and how that skill could be used to read market trends and anticipate a competitor's move. Ms. Reynolds, the woman with the glasses, took frantic notes, her initial skepticism replaced by rapt attention. When Marcus finally left the Apex building an hour later, the late afternoon sun felt warm on his face. He hadn't gotten the job, not yet. They had more interviews to conduct, they'd said. But he knew he'd done more than just interview. He'd educated. He'd drawn a line in the sand, not with a weapon, but with the truth of what he was and what he carried. He walked down the busy city sidewalk, a man in a $1,200 suit, and invisible once more to the crowds rushing past. They didn't see the scars. They didn't see the weight he carried. They just saw another businessman. And that was fine. He walked past a young man in a crisp Marine Corps uniform, the eagle, globe, and anchor gleaming on his collar. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. No words were exchanged. There was no need. In that single glance was a lifetime of shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement between brothers. The young Marine gave a barely perceptible nod. Marcus returned it, a slight inclination of his head. It was a greeting more profound than any handshake. It was a recognition of the uniform beneath the suit, the one that could never be removed. And as he continued on his way, the noise of the city faded, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of his own footsteps, the footsteps of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. The battlefield had just changed, that was all, and Marcus Thorne had never lost a battle.